Hello everybody, and welcome back to another card game tutorial video. In this video we'll be focusing on three things: using INI files to create a save state, we'll be adding rooms, and implementing a deck creator. By the end of this video, your game should look like this. If we press the continue button, it will bring us to the room we are familiar with seeing. If we hit the new game option, it will bring us to a new room that will allow us to build our own deck. And once we completely build our deck and hit this play button, it will take us back to the room we are familiar with, except it will load the deck we just created. And any other time you come back to that familiar room, you'll have the deck you previously created. And then for now, the options button won't do anything. So in this video, we're going to be reusing a lot of the code we have done in older videos. So you can watch this one and follow along, but it might be easier if you watch these two videos first. The first one would be video 5, how to create a deck in GameMaker Studio, because each one of these piles will be a new deck. And then the next one would be video 11, creating an infinite card hand. So whenever we create our deck, we'll be using the same code we used for our hand to print it all out so that the player can see all of the cards he has added to his deck. The topic of this video was recommended by one of my viewers, so if you're interested in seeing something in the future, be sure to leave it in the comments section below, and I'll do my best to get to it in a later video. Now, if you like this series and you want to see more, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to support this series, be sure to check out my Patreon, linked in the description below. So the first thing we want to do is upload some new sprites. These sprites can be found in a link in the description to a Google document, and if for whatever reason that link isn't there, be sure to check out my Twitter page. So the first sprite we want to create is going to be the menu sprite. And that sprite will look like this. And we want to justify this to the middle center. And we're going to change the size width from 160 to 640 to match the room width. The next sprite we want to create is going to be a tile sprite, and we're going to call this SPR menu tile. And this is so we can make the whole room the same color. And that color is going to match the menu sprite. So we're going to justify this to the middle center, and we're going to keep that its regular size. The next sprite we want to create is the arrow sprite we will use to select one of the menu options. Now we want to increase the size of this arrow to match the change in size to the menu sprite, and that will be by a multiple of 4, so the new width should be 20. And we want to justify that in the middle center. And now we want to create a new room. So we're going to change this room to match the same size as our old room, which will be 640 by 807. And then for the background, we are going to make the menu sprite. And we are going to set the Y offset to be 110. And then we're going to create a new background image, and we're going to use that tile sprite we uploaded, and we're going to want to stretch it. So our new room should look like this. And the next thing we want to do is create another new room. We are going to change the size to 640 by 807. And for the background, we're going to use that same tile sprite, and we're going to stretch it again. So now if we have these two new rooms, if we hit the play button, we will see that the game will automatically start in the first room in the rooms list, which will be the room we are familiar with. But if I put room 1 above room 0 and I restart the game, we'll see that we will start in the menu room we created. As you can see. But now we want to create the code to navigate to the different rooms. So if we press the continue option, we'll go to room 0, or the room we are familiar with. If we press new game, we'll go to the deck creator room, and we're going to leave option alone for now. So let's create that object. And we're going to call that object obj menu. And we're going to set the sprite of that object to be the arrow button. We are going to add a create event. And in the create event, we're going to only initialize one variable. And that variable is going to be step is equal to 0. The step is going to be what option we select, whether that be continue, new game, or option. And then we're going to add a draw event, and we're going to say if step is greater than 0, draw self. So that arrow will only be drawn if one of the three options is selected. So continue will be when step equals 1, new game will be when step equals 2, and options will be when step equals 3. So the next one we want to create is a step event. And in that step event, we are going to specify where those three options will be. But in order to do that, we need to figure out what the coordinates are. So we're going to use the X and Y tool we've used in previous videos to tell us where those coordinates need to be. And in order to see that, we need to add this menu object into the room. So be sure to have instances selected and drag this anywhere into the room. So what we want is if the mouse cursor is hovering over the continue option, we want the menu arrow to appear next to the continue option, and same for the new game and option. So we want that to be between the topmost point of the C and the bottommost point of the C, and also on both ends of the option title. So we know that for all options, X has to be between 64 and 312. And for the Y position, for the continue option, it needs to be between 174 and 203. And then for the new game option, we need it to be between 238 and 266. And then for the options, we need it to be between 302 and 330. So we're going to add that code into the step event. So if mouse X is greater than 64 and mouse X is less than 312, we know that the mouse is in between these points. So now we need to specify the Y direction. If mouse Y is greater than 174 and mouse Y is less than 203, we know we have selected step 1. So that would be the continue option. So now let's add the code for the next 2 steps. And if it is not in either of those 3 positions, we want to set step equal to 0. And then we're going to do the same for the X position. Now, in order to put the arrow in the right place, if step is equal to 1, we want the Y coordinate of the object to be 187. And if we're on the second option, we want the Y position to equal 252. And lastly, if step equals 3, we want the Y position to equal 317. So now we need an X position for our cursor object. And we're going to set that in the create event. And we're going to set X equal to 40. So if we've done that correctly, our menu cursor should appear in the proper places. So if we hover over continue, we see that the arrow appears, and if I get out of the continue option, that arrow disappears. Now, if I hover over new game, the same thing happens, and then the same thing for option. Now, we want to create code to navigate to the next rooms when we select these options. So going back to our step event, if the mouse button is released, if step is equal to 1, we want to go to room 1. If step is equal to 2, we want to go to room 2. And if step is equal to 3, we want nothing to happen. So now let's see if that works properly. So if I click continue, we go to the room we are familiar with, and then if I click new game, we are in the new room for where we will put our deck creation code. In order to start working on this room, we need to add a few new sprites. And those sprites are going to be SPR energy tile for all of our energy cards. And we're going to import this image and justify it in the middle center. And then we are also going to add a new sprite called SPR trainer tile. And we're going to import this image. But we want to change the width of this to match that of the energy tile, so we'll change that to 114. And then the next sprite we want to add is our cancel button. This is a button I created for my card game, so I just thought I'd bring it over to this one. And then the last sprite we will need is the play button. So now let's create the deck creator object. And the first thing we want to create is the create event. And in this event, we are going to set a deck count to equal 0. We're going to have a selected value equal false. We are going to initialize the arrays we use for our cards, or for our card information. We are going to initialize the sprite array, and we're going to initialize the big sprite array. We're also going to create a deck of 60 cards. And we're going to create a Y view variable to equal 700. Now, this variable will be used when printing out the deck that we've created. And the next thing we're going to do is create a draw event. Now, what we're going to do for the draw event is we're going to mimic what we did for our hand, so that we can draw all the cards in our deck centered in the room. So we're going to take from the step event these two lines of code, and we're going to repurpose them here. So we want to print out all the cards. So for I is equal to 0 and I is less than 60, I++, we're going to create a card sprite variable, and we're going to set that equal to the sprite array value at that deck card position. And then we're going to paste that code we've just copied over, and we're going to change this value to be the deck count. We're going to get rid of all of the player designators. So we're going to type in the search bar. If you press Control F, we're going to type in player period, and then we're going to replace it with nothing, just so we can get rid of all of that. And then we're also going to change hand count to deck count and replace those. And then we're going to change the variable hand position to I. Let's see, is there anything else we want to change? I don't believe so. Now, if the deck value is greater than 0, which means there is a card there, we're going to draw the sprite of that card. And we're going to use the card sprite, and we're going to use that card sprite variable we just created, and we're going to use the initial image of it, and then we're going to print it at X position and Y view. So that's what this variable is being used for. So now we've successfully printed the deck we created. Now the next thing we want to do is to be able to make sure how many cards we have in that deck. So we're going to draw the deck count in the center of the room. So first we want to set the color of the text we're drawing to black. And then we're going to draw text at room width divided by 2 minus 2 to offset for the small text, and then at room height divided by 2 plus 100. And the string we're going to print out will be our deck count value. So now we've successfully drawn our deck and our deck count. Now, before we forget, let's put this object into that new room, which will be room 2. Be sure to have your instances tab selected and just drag it anywhere. Now, one thing I want to add to this object is if we want to restart the game. And we have this already in our deck object, but the deck object won't be in this room. So if we want to restart the game in this room, we need to add this somewhere in that room. And this is where we are going to add it. If keyboard, check released, we're going to use VK escape, which is our escape button on our keyboard. This is mainly for testing purposes. We're going to restart the game. And that's all for this object. Now, the next object will be the type pile. So we're going to call that obj underscore type pile. This will be for all of the different piles we want to print out, which will be the different types of Pokemon, the trainer cards, the energy cards, and for the cancel and play button. So we're going to use this one object to do a multitude of things. We're going to actually add a sprite to this one, even though we're going to change it almost immediately whenever it's actually created in the game. So we're going to we're going to give it the sprite for the colorless token. Now in the create event, we're going to copy over a lot of the variables we created in the object deck creator. So we're just going to take these first 6 lines and paste them here. Another variable we want to create is a variable we're going to call done, and I'll explain that later. We're going to create a deck X for this, and we're going to set it at 120. A deck Y value, and we're going to set that equal to 260. Again, these have all been explained in earlier videos, so if you want a little more in-depth of how these actually work, be sure to check out the 2 videos I mentioned in the beginning. Now, we want to drag these decks so we can see all of the cards. So, if you remember, we created these variables in order to do that. We have an X view to change the view in the X position, the Y view to maintain a Y view that we were going to set to deck Y, and then we're going to create a second deck X value to equal deck X, because the deck X2 value will change, and we want to maintain the deck X value in a different variable so the game doesn't forget it. We're going to have a card selected variable for the card we want to add to our deck, and the next thing we want to do is to create the draw event. In this event, we're going to mimic what we did in our deck object. So let's go to our deck object in the draw event. We have this line that we're going to copy over. So this is going to go through the whole deck and print out all of the cards for that deck. Now, we haven't created these decks yet, but we're going to get this out of the way first before we get to that, because that will be a little harder. And then we're going to add the draw self function call. Now, before we move away from this, we want to tailor it for this. We want to tailor it for how we're going to use it in this instance. So the card sprites we're going to use are actually going to be the big card sprites. So we want to change that. And then we also want to get rid of all of the deck buffers, since we're not going to actually be printing it like a deck. So we're just going to remove all of those, and then we're going to move all of the Y deck buffers as well. Now, those were accompanied by functions of I, so we need to get rid of that as well. And then you should be left with this. We need to change this a little bit more. So what this did is, after it reached a certain distance it would print the top face of the card. But we won't need that for this. We just want to print all of the cards. So we're going to get rid of this line right here. And only do this if that deck position is greater than 0. Looks like... So now that we have that, let's set up our new decks. So what we're going to do is add a step event, and in that step event, if text is equal to fire and done is equal to 0, we want to set the sprite index of this object to equal the sprite of the fire token. And then for I is equal to 0 and I is less than 102, because there's 102 cards in this set, I++. And what this is going to do is go through all of the cards in our game, and if its type is a fire type, we're going to set the deck value at the deck counter equal to that I value. And then if I is equal to 102, which means we've gone through the entire set of the game, which means we've gone through the entire set, we're going to set done equal to 1 so that it doesn't repeat this over and over and over again. We haven't created this script yet, so let's do that now. So this script will be very close to another script we've made. So let's just copy this one over and paste it into here. We're going to give it a card number value at argument 1. And then we're going to return the strings value that corresponds with that card number in the first position. So if we go to our initialization of these arrays, we want the string value in the first position. So as you can see, it says psychic here. Now 0 is a placeholder, so at the 0 position will be Alakazam, at the first position will be the type of the card. And we added 10 to it because there's 10 string values for every card. So this will return the type of that card. So now that we're back here, we can see that the script is now orange. And then one more event we want to create before we test this is mouse left released. And if it is released, we're going to set selected equal to true. And then one more thing we want to add to the draw event is if the object has been selected. So now that we have this code, let's add this to the room. So in our instances tab, we're going to take this and we're going to drag it to the place we want. And that place is going to be, if you have the grid on, which will be this button, 4 over and 2 down. Now, how you make these objects different is if you double click, if you go to creation code, if I can then set new variables specific to this object, and I'm going to set the txt variable to equal fire. So now with this, when this is created, it will set that value equal to fire, and then it will then go through this condition. It will change the sprite index of the object, and then it will create its deck. So now let's test that. So now if we start the game, if we select new game, we get an error saying that in our get type script at line 3, it's out of range of the array. And that's because here we set I equal to 0 when we should have set it equal to 1. So now that we changed it to 1, it should work fine. So if we select new game, we see that the sprite index has changed to the fire token, and if we select it, it now draws the sprites. But this isn't how I want the sprites to be drawn. That's because we're using the big card sprites, but we're using the card widths of the small sprites. So let's add big here. And that should space them out properly, which it does. And another thing I want to do is increase the size of this, because this is a little small. So I'm going to increase this size by 2. So in the step event, I'm going to set the image X scale to equal to, and the image Y scale to equal to. So when we select new game, we can see that that object sprite has gotten bigger, but as you can see, the resolution of the sprite is very pixelated. Now there's a way you can fix this that was brought up to me by one of my patrons and one of my subscribers, so shout out to them. So in order to fix this, and if you want it to look a little bit more smooth, we can add a script call in the create event that's GPU set text filter to be true. So adding that line, if I restart the game, if I hit new game, we can see that it's not perfect, but it looks a little less pixelated. Now, the next thing we want to do is be able to drag all of the cards in the deck so that we can see them all. So that's going to be done in the step event. So if selected is equal to true, we want to be able to drag the deck. Now we're going to take more code from our deck object. In the step event, we're going to take this code and we're going to bring it into our type pile object. Now what we want to change here is we need to get rid of all of the deck buffer X functions. So that's this one and this one. We also want to use the width of the big card sprites and the big card heights. And that should be all we need to change for this one. So now we should be able to drag the deck. As you can see, we can drag the deck. So let's see. Ooh, that goes forever. So what this is doing is it's re-adding all of the cards, which is something you can do if that's how you want it, but I want it to stop once it goes through it one time. So what it looks like is that in the step event, it just keeps going and going. And that's because I never equals 102. And that's because this needs to be less than or equal to 102. So now it's actually going to go through all of the cards in the deck, and it's only going to do it one time. So if you want to be able to do this in your coding, which I don't recommend, you'll just need to add this equal sign and remove this. But again, I don't recommend it because that will be an infinite array. But there is a way you can do it without doing it that way. But I'll let you figure that out. So now that we've done that, let's retest it. So I'm going to hit new game. And now if I try to move it too far this way, it snaps back into place just like we have with our other game. And then it doesn't go too far, but I actually want this to stop here. So there must be something in this side here that needs to be changed, and that's this. I need to do big card width. So now when the game loads, it will actually stop here and snap Charizard into this place instead of this place. So I don't need to show you that, but making that change will make the end of the pile snap here and not go any further. So now we want to do this for all of the other types. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to copy it down here. I'm going to make it an else if statement. I'm going to change the txt to be water, and I'm going to change the type to be capitalized water. And then I'm going to change the sprite index to be the water token. So now let's add this one into the room and see what it looks like with 2. So I'm going to space this 2 squares from the one we just created. I'm going to double click it. In the creation code, I'm going to set txt equal to undercase water. And now let's load the game. So if we select new game, we have another option. And if I select that, we can see that now I have all of the water cards. If I go too far, it's going to snap Blastoise in that place I want it to be. Now, only one of them is selected, but if I go and select the fire, you can see both decks are being shown. So I need to not allow that. So if I go back to my workspace, we're going to create the condition if the mouse button has been pressed, and it has to be pressed, not released, because we have a released action and they will negate each other. And the mouse Y position is less than 94. We're going to set the selected value to equal false, and we are going to set the deck X2 value to equal its original value, so that whenever you reprint the deck after deselecting it, it will print back in its normal state. So before we test that, let's add another condition up here, just so we can show how easy it is to use the same object for multiple things. So instead of fire and water, we're going to now do grass. And we're going to do that lowercase grass. We're going to change it to grass token, and then we're going to put uppercase grass in the type. Now let's go to our room, and let's add a new object. And in the creation code, we're going to set txt, make sure it's undercase, equal to lowercase grass. Now let's retest this. So select new game. If I press grass, we now have all of the grass cards. And if I select above 94, which will be this spot right here, it will deselect it. And then if I select it again, it prints from the beginning. Now, if I select, let's say, the water Pokemon, it will deselect the leaf cards and select the water cards. And as you can see, it prints back to the beginning. So now let's add the rest of the types. So we need one for lightning, psychic, and colorless. So let's do lightning first. And now let's add those to the room. So 1, 2, 3. And there's one I almost forgot, which is fighting. So let's add that here. Go back here, and we're going to make this fighting. And add one more. And this one will be for the colorless. So now let's load the room. Make sure it worked for all of the different types of cards. So you can see we have them all. We have our colorless cards, our fighting cards, our psychic cards, and our lightning cards. So that works just fine. Now there's two other types of cards that we haven't done yet, and that's the trainer cards and the energy cards. And we'll be doing that in the same fashion. So let's add two more. We're going to do trainer. We're going to change the sprite index to trainer tile. And the type will be trainer. And then same for energy. And that's going to be energy tile. So now let's add these two. So we're going to add these in between the first two and the last two. Now, I know exactly where I want these to be, so I'm going to select the one first, and I'm going to push it up with my arrow key up 10 times. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then I'm going to do the same for the other one. And now for the creation code, the first one will be for my trainers. And the second one will be for my energy cards. So now let's test that. So as you can see, they are now printed. We have our trainer cards and we have our energy cards. So it's that easy. But now we want to be able to add one of these cards to our deck. So the way I want to do that is if I double click a card, I want it to be automatically added to the deck I'm creating. So let's go back to the type pile event and the step event. And what I want to do is I want to create a new condition. If the mouse button has been pressed, and we're going to choose left, and mouse Y is greater than 94, which is contrast to this one, and mouse Y is less than 417, which means we are pressing the space in between the topmost part of the card and the bottommost part of the card. We want to set the alarm 0 to equal 7. So what this is going to do is create an alarm that lasts 7 frames. Now I'm going to add that alarm here. So we are only going to use this alarm for a timer. Now, if we press the mouse button again, and that timer has not ran out, we want to add the card to deck. Now, the equation we're about to put in is something I created that you can use when you're trying to select a card from your deck. So I'm just going to type it out, follow along, and I'll explain it as I go. So we're going to create a local variable, and we're going to call it card selected, and we're going to set that equal to the deck count plus floor deck x2 minus mouse x minus big card width divided by 2. And we're going to divide that by big card width plus 10. And then we're going to subtract that by 1. So explaining this function may just confuse you, but if you would like an explanation of this function, please leave a comment down below and I'll be sure to answer you, because this is a little complex. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to change that variable of card selected to equal the deck to equal the card value at that deck position. Now, with our deck creator object, we are going to add it to that deck. So what that will look like is if I double click this card. Ooh, that's not working right. What's happening is this isn't a double click, it's just a single click. And that's because this condition needs to be behind this condition to make it a double click, because this is setting the alarm to be greater than -1, and this is looking for if it is greater than -1. So we want this one to hit first, and then it needs to go back around to read this one. So now let's do that one more time. So a new game, we're going to select the grass type. If I click it once, it doesn't add it. If I click it a second time, it doesn't add it. If I click it slowly, it doesn't add it, but if I click it quick, I've added it, which is what we want. So we can add these cards. But now, in Pokemon, you're only allowed to have 4 of one card, unless it's an energy card. An energy card, you can have as many as you want. Don't recommend having a deck full of them, but you can have as many as you want. Now, the ones that have a condition on it are non-basic energies. So you're only allowed to have 4 double colorless and 4 of any one Pokemon. So we want to make a condition to not allow the player to add more than 4 of one card. So that will be a simple condition here. If we want to check the total of the card selected, and as long as that is less than 4, add it to the card, or add it to the deck. Or it's a basic energy card, then also add it to the deck. And do this as long as deck count is less than 60. So now we need to create these two scripts. The first one is check total. And in this script, we're going to have two variables, argument 0 for the card number, and then we're going to initialize a temp value, and we're going to set that equal to 0. Now, with the deck creator object, we're going to go through the whole deck. And if deck I is equal to the card number, we're going to increment the temp value. And then we're going to return that temp value. And the next one we want to do is script is basic energy. And in this object, and in this script, we're going to take in one variable, and we're going to set that equal to argument 0. And if it is an energy card, and card num does not equal 96, which would be double colorless, return 1. Else, return 0. Simple. So now if we go back, we can see that those scripts are now being used. And one more thing we want to change to show that you're unable to select the card is in this draw sprite right above it, we want to create a condition. If script check total of the deck value is equal to 4, and it is not a basic energy card, we want to draw the sprite, except we want to fade it out. So we're going to use draw sprite extension, and we're going to add a few new values to it. So we're going to make the Y scale equal to 1 because we don't want that to change, the X scale to 1 because we don't want that to change, the rotation to 0, the color to be the same, see white, and then the alpha we're going to change to 0.5. And then in the else statement, we want to draw it regularly. So now let's test that. So we're going to select a new game, and we're going to create a deck. So we're going to add star U. We added it 4 times, and we can't add it anymore. So you can see we have 4 of those. We're going to add star U. We're going to have 4 of those. We're going to have 4 Squirtles, 4 War Turtles, and 4 Blastoises. Now, in the energy cards, we should only be able to add 4 of these, which we are, and we should be able to add an infinite amount of basic energies. So we want to add some trainers as well. And it should stop as soon as we reach 60. So we have 60 cards, and I shouldn't be able to add any more, and I'm unable to. So we've successfully created a deck. Now, what if we wanted to remove one of the cards. Or if we want to go to the room and play with the cards, we need 2 more objects. But since we've already used these ones, we're just going to reuse the same object but add 2 more conditions to it. So in the type file, what we're going to do is we're going to create 2 more else if conditions. And one is going to be cancel, and we don't need this done condition. And we're going to change this to cancel button. We're not going to create a deck for it, but if the deck creator object does not have any cards in its deck, we don't want to remove a card from that deck. So we're going to change the image alpha to equal 0.5. And in the else statement, we're going to change image alpha to equal 1. And then in the next one, it's going to be play. Again, we don't need this done condition. We don't need to create a deck for it. And we're going to change the sprite index to the play button. And then we're going to do a very similar condition from the cancel. And if deck count is equal to 60, we're going to set the image alpha to be 1, because then you can start the game. If it's not, you can't, and you need to complete your deck. So we're going to change that equal to 0.5. Now, we only want this image scale to work for our token and tile sprites. So if txt is equal to cancel, or if txt does not equal cancel, and txt does not equal play, then make the image scale larger. And then we want to go in our left released event, and we want to copy over this condition, because those should not be selected, and if they are, then it's going to go into a bunch of code we don't want it to go into. Since it doesn't have a deck, it shouldn't operate any of this code. So we never want to set its selected value to be true. But what we want it to do is if txt is equal to cancel, and object deck creator deck count is greater than 0, with object deck creator we want to set the deck at the deck counter to equal 0, and then we want to decrement it afterwards. And then if the txt value is equal to play, and object deck creator deck count is equal to 60, we want to go to room 1, which is the room we are familiar with. And then we also want to make this an else if statement. So now we should have all the code we need for this object. So let's now add these in their proper location. So I want to turn the grid back on, and I want to add this to be 4 over 1, 2, 3, 4, and 10 up. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So perfect. And then I'm going to add another one to the other side. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to make this my cancel button. And I'm going to make this one my play button. So let's go to new game. As you can see, the buttons are there. And let's create a deck. So I'm going to have some Charmanders. As you can see, now that I have cards in the deck, I can remove them. Some Growlithes, Magmars, let's add some Chanseys, let's add some energy. And then some trainer cards. So now that we have 60 cards in our deck, we can hit the play button and it will allow us to go to that room we are familiar with. So now we've created our very own deck, and now we can then go to the room to play with it. But in our player object, we are still initializing the deck we've already created. So what we need to do is create a new deck initialization. We're going to comment that out since we're not creating it just yet. We're going to need to remove these lines of code, and then we're eventually going to remove this. But we need to create a save file for what we are creating. So this is what it will look like. This is an INI file. This is the last part of the video that we're going to go over. And you can find this file in your PC if you go to your C drive, go to your users folder, go to the user you're on. I'm on mine. Go to your app data, which is a hidden folder. So you're going to want to go to view and make sure you can see your hidden items. Click on app data, go to your local folder, find the name that you've called it, which is card game for me, and it's going to be game 1. Now if you open this, it's going to have information of your deck. Now if you're creating a professional game, I wouldn't recommend doing it this way, because if anybody has the know-how, they can go in and change this to whatever card they want, save it, and then load it up, and then they pretty much, quote, hacked your game. So a lot of old games have this problem, and if you know your way around these files and the way that the game is programmed, you can go in and change values in order to crack the code to change the game around. So in a professional game, what I would do is do this on the server end so that the player does not have access to this. One thing I wanted to do when doing this was make sure that this file was saved with my executable so I could always find it and it'll always be there. You are able to do this in GameMaker Studio 1, but you can't do it in GameMaker Studio 2. So this is where you'll have to go in order to do that. What we need to do is create our very own INI file. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this file as if we don't have it, so you don't have it either. The good thing about GameMaker is it will make it for you if it doesn't exist. In order to add this, we're going to go to our object type pile, and in our left release button, when we hit the play button, we want to add these to our INI file. So what we're going to need to do is open the INI file, and we're going to call this file game1.ini. So So we've successfully opened the file, and what this will do is if this file doesn't exist, but you write to it, it will create the file for you. Now if you do this and you only read from the file, it will not create it. So what we're going to do is write to it. So for I is equal to 0, and I is less than 60, I++, we're going to add each card of the deck into the ini file. So we're going to do that by using ini underscore write real, and then we are going to create a section, and we're going to call that section deck. We're going to use the key, which needs to be a string, and we're just going to use the I value, and then we're going to send it the object deck creator deck value at that I position. And then when we are done with that, we are going to close the ini file. Now anytime you open an ini file, you should close it immediately after. You're only able to open up one ini file at a time. So let's go back to that folder. As you can see, this is where it will be whenever it is created. So let's start the game. Let's hit new game. And now what we have to do is create a new deck. So let's just do this very quickly, or you can just follow along. I'm going to create a deck of just energy cards. You know, I'll put one random card in there just so we can see it. And make sure that it's adding all the cards properly. So now that we have 60, let's hit the play button. And as you can see, that ini file has been created. So let's open it up. So I have added all 102, and there should be one different card, which is 101. And that's the deck we created. So now what we want to do is be able to use this in this room. So when this room is loaded, we want to read from this ini file. So now let's go back to our player object. And we're going to now create this deck initialization, and we're going to remove this one. And in this script, we're going to have one variable. We're going to call it I. We're going to open the ini file that we've called game1. Remember to watch your upper and lower cases because it has to match. And then for I is equal to 0 and I is less than 60, I++. Now the deck in this object is going to equal the ini read real ini. And in the read real script, it needs the section that we created, which is deck. It needs the value of, it needs to know what part of that section we're creating, also known as the key, which we've set to equal the deck position. And it's going to return a value if that key doesn't exist. So we want that value to be a number greater than 0 and less than 102. So we're just going to put 1, which will represent the card number for Alakazam. So if we see Alakazam somewhere, we know that this file wasn't read properly. And then we know there's going to be 60 cards in the deck, so we're just going to set our deck count equal to 0, and then we're going to close the ini file. So now that we have that, when we load the game, if I hit the continue button instead of the new game button, it should have a deck filled with water energy and 1 psychic energy. So let's see. there's all the water energy. So now we've successfully loaded in a deck we've created on our own. So now we only want to be able to hit the continue button if that INI file exists. So let's do that real quick. Where we want to go is our menu object. In the step event, above the mouse button released condition, we're going to open the INI file that we've called game 1. And if step is equal to 1 and INI section exists, we're going to choose deck. Then we can go to the next room. But remember, we have to close the INI file. And I need to put ands instead of multiplications. So what this is doing is it's going to open up this INI file and it's going to check to see if this section exists. And if it doesn't, which would be this section right here, if it doesn't, that means we don't have a save state and it won't allow the player to go into that room until it exists. So let's delete this file again and see if it allows us to go into that room. So if I select continue, as you can see, it doesn't let me go into that room. So a game doesn't exist. So now let's go to new game and create a quick deck. Create my favorite one. And then we'll start the game. So now we're back to this deck. So now if I restart the game, I can now hit continue and go back in. So we've successfully created a save state. We are able to create our own deck, and we have been jumping through different rooms of our game. So this is all I wanted to go over in this video. Again, if you liked the video and you enjoy the series, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. If you want to be able to download these files and support this channel, be sure to check out my Patreon, linked in the description below. And if you have anything you want to see in a later video, be sure to let me know. Until next time.